All right. So today the dialogue is on inspiration and fresh ideas, which actually this is probably a good timing because we're doing all this 2024 planning and have to kind of make a lot of creative ideas and decisions and forecasts and things like that. And when we were at our in-person last week, I was showing Angela The Accidental Creative, which is like one of my favorite books that I make everybody read, because the idea of being creative on demand is part of being successful as a creative professional. But I think maybe for today's dialogue, we can maybe speak more broadly because especially both of y'all, like, though you do versions of creative expression professionally, you both also have like a really robust creative practice that's totally personal and non-commercialized and just part of your existence. So I think that this could kind of be cool. Like, we don't necessarily have to couch all of these ideas today in professional terms. We can maybe think more broadly about just creativity as a form of self-expression and how we gain ideas to express ourselves. So agree?
Yeah, I love that.
All right. So let's start with like the most basic. Where do new ideas come from?
Yeah, I think creativity in general is like very combinatorial. Like it's a culmination of your experiences, your reflection on those experiences, the things you read, the things you watch, the things you consume, the environments you're in. I think when you go out of your way to consume and engage with humanity and with your own humanity as much as possible, and then also create space to reflect on those experiences, that's when creativity can happen in those in like the intersection between those two things. But I think there's also something to be said for like the discipline it takes to create space to observe that process. Like if you're constantly like I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't think creativity is like this thing rather than this like this natural thing that happens inside you that you have to work to like observe or like make space for, not like something like an action that you do. Does that make sense? No.
Yes, it's very abstract. And I think you're hitting on something that is endlessly interesting to handle, an idea that is which is creativity a process? Is it a product? Is it a state of mind? Is it a worldview? Like, where does creativity happen? At what point in our existence does creativity happen? Is it ontological? Is it hypothetical? Is it like, where does it live? Because we often talk about creativity in very mental ways. Like, you have to get in flow, right? Like neurological flow. You have to, like, we tend to, maybe not we, I shouldn't say that. I tend to make it academic because that's how I approach the world, right? So I think about the steps that it takes to be creative, or the practices and disciplines that it takes to be a more creative person and more usefully implement the things that I observe and handle in the real world. But like, for instance, you, Taylor, like, are much more in tune with your emotions than I am, and you're much better at handling emotions than I am. Like, I feel like there's a level of creativity that is totally non-intellectual. That's literally just what you feel and then how you.
Yeah, I guess I don't necessarily see the line between those two things as being this like concrete thing. I think like a lot of times we see emotions as this like spiritual thing, but actually I think emotions are like very directly tied to like more so tied to logic than like well, now we're talking about neuroscience, but I'll just go off.
Here we go, tangenting. We knew this was a huge risk, putting you and I on the same conversation.
Hi, Ashley.
Ashley's going to bring us back to Earth.
I guess what I was trying to say is that, like, when it comes to creativity, I think that emotions and like the logic of it are more closely like related, like live beside each other in a way that's necessary. Like I don't think there's this like divide. I don't see it as a divide, which maybe is what you were saying, like how I'm more in touch with it, like right. I'm able to bridge those together maybe. But yeah,
and maybe that bifurcation is a violence that I'm imposing on the human condition.
Maybe. That's not for me to say.
That's deep. So, Ashley, we're starting with just the very basic idea, and it immediately went off the rails of where where new ideas come from.
Yeah, I think that for me, it's more of a, and this is way more basic than the conversation that I jumped into. But I would say, how do I want to put this? I don't know. I think that like for me personally, new ideas come from like experiences and yeah, just like solving problems and looking at it from a different perspective. I think I tend to look at my things more operationally than where that's where my new ideas come from of like, how can I make this better? Or like, what would I do? How would I have done this? And yeah, but that tends to be how my brain works in terms of like that I'm creative in that way.
Do you look at other creative works just in like as like a pastime and like troubleshoot what they do and like understand why they did certain things and how you would do it better?
Yeah, I would say that that's pretty accurate. I try to like break down and deconstruct and then figure out like, oh, well, I would have done it differently this way, or that's like a really good, or more of like, oh, I never would have thought about that in that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I tend to break things down like, yeah, I can't think of the term that I'm trying to find, but yeah. It's not so much of like an inspiration of like, oh, a new idea.
Like a little baby from a stork.
Yes.
Yeah. I just don't think that's like that, like new ideas are like, I think that by building on other people's ideas is like how all new ideas come about. Like, and when you said your experiences and stuff like that, that really resonates with me. I think that makes a lot of sense because like observing how other people do things, like even I'm trying to remember, I think it's Isaac Newton. He had the whole quote, if I've seen further, it's by standing on the shoulders of other people. Is that right? It's not exactly but yeah, it just means like every like new thought is actually just like an evolution of somebody else's thought, and like by obsessively learning as much as we can, that's how we can create new ideas, but just like more evolved ideas.
Yeah. And I always wonder, like, I feel like many people have the same new idea. It's just like who acts on it first.
I noticed that too. That's very strange. Yeah. I often think about like the spiritual element of creativity and how like it often seems like the collective consciousness is all creating the same things based on like our experiences that we're all having on like a global scale. Like a whole bunch of the same things will come out at the same time, and you're just like, or you have an idea and then like all of a sudden there's a movie being made about it. You're like, yeah, this is weird. Yeah.
There's a book called The Idea Next Door. Or no, it's called Where Good Ideas Come From. Yeah. You should read that. It's all about that. It exactly explains that. Like the phenomenon of discovery in the US and Australia happened at the exact same time. And that's very interesting. But like in ontological philosophy, there are basically two approaches to the idea of concepts and like intellectual growth. So the first is that you're born with everything you will ever know, and that it is all within you. And that as you walk through life, you unlock those concepts and awareness of those concepts by experiencing something. So when you experience something, suddenly it unlocks within you. But there's kind of like a predetermined / finite amount of things that you can or will ever know. And then the other idea is that you're basically born totally blank slate. Okay, we all know who that is, right? Like Descartes, etc. And that as you venture out into the world, you collect concepts. So you are born not knowing what a bear is until you encounter a bear in some form, be it stuffed or real. And then you're told what it's called in language, but that the concept has not existed in you before. And then it suddenly exists.
Mm.
I think it's interesting to grapple with that when you think about, and I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I think it's more of like, which of those feels true for you in kind of your phenomenological experience of the world, and which one is more useful to you in the pursuit of new ideas.
Do you think that either, like subscribing too closely to either is really helpful? Because to me, listening to both of those, I think that there's very valid arguments for both, which would maybe make me lean towards somewhere closer to the middle of like, you're born with quite a bit and you move through and collect things as you go. I don't know, like, do you think that like when we're talking about new ideas, that subscribing too closely to one or another could be like very limiting?
And belief systems are, I think, by definition, limiting.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes with creativity, though, limits are good. Like creative constraints are good. Most of the time they are. But yeah, I don't know if like if a whole life philosophy, subscribing too closely to one or another, yeah, would prevent you from. Yeah, interesting. Sorry, just.
No. It dovetails nicely into like the nature versus nurture conversation, because when you're thinking about new ideas, a helpful, I think, consideration becomes like, how do new ideas exist? Like, how do they exist, right? Or is it just an iteration of an idea that's ultimately derivative, right? Like art, most people will say like visual art is very derivative and things like that. So, I mean, I think it's an interesting point of consideration, because we want to be in the business of pursuing new ideas and having a consistent, steady stream of fresh, creative ideas. Obviously, for me, like I think of the application mostly in business, but also in personal life. Like, how can I be the kind of person who lives able to tap into inspiration when I want or need to? And so the idea of knowledge acquisition, I do think, is relevant to that. What do you think?
Yeah.
Annie? Sorry. If I don't call on him, he won't talk.
I mean, I think I agree with all of that. Of like, new ideas come from old ideas. I just feel like it's very rare, unless you go like way back, of like a truly original new idea. And it is, like Taylor was saying, like kind of an evolution of something. As you look at the newest, latest technologies or whatever else you're talking about, like Isaac Asimov wrote about it 60 years ago or whatever, and it was science fiction then, but it was already there. The idea was already there. But I think for me, like what can foster the new ideas and what can really help kind of get that juice flowing is that knowledge acquisition, is that just taking in as much as I possibly can, so that my brain is able to make connections from this to that, to this, to that, to that, and, jump 10 miles down the road, but it wouldn't have gotten there if I hadn't already had this piece of information or this experience or, this proficiency in something. Cause like you talk about limitations in creativity. I think of like music, where I can have a tune in my head and I can, hear it and develop it or whatever. But if I don't know how to actually play an instrument, then I can't really do anything with it, But if you're proficient in an instrument or a tool or with a pencil or words or whatever, then once that idea comes in, you know how to get it out, you know how to get it there, you know what to do with it. But if you don't have that information, you don't have that stuff, then either you can't get it out, or you spend a long time trying to make something happen that's already happened.
Yeah, that's a really good point about honing craft. Like you can have ideas or like these ineffable feelings about something you want to communicate, but if you don't have any sense of craft, that's not going to manifest in like an idea per se. So yeah, like learning, like taking in knowledge, like abstract knowledge, but also technical knowledge being like a critical component. That's really interesting.
All right. I think that actually goes nicely into kind of the next area that we were going to dialogue, which is, what is the origin of revelations or epiphanies?
I'm just going to let someone else speak for a second because I've taken up a lot of space.
It's a deep question.
Yeah, I was just thinking, wow, this is a big question. I don't know if I can articulate.
I can go. I wanted to make sure I wasn't jumping in before if you had something you have to say right away. Yeah, because I think a lot about epiphany and revelation. And I think there's like an element of like spirituality when people talk about this, or like something above the self when people talk about revelation. And I have always, like, for most of my life, resisted this idea of like spirituality and creativity being connected. But as I get older and I have these like creative ideas, like I write a lot and create a lot in like other mediums as well. And I've had creative success when I have like work ethic and dedication, but I've also had these like epiphany moments. And without fail, all of my favorite things I've ever created came to me as this sort of like an epiphany, where it felt like something passing by me that I had to hop on right away, and like something controlling my body almost, and like creating this thing. So yeah, I mean, I remember when I was very young, and I wish I could remember who said this, but it was a writer said this, that sometimes these epiphanies come to like a freight train that's like rushing past you, and you have to jump on the train and follow it as far as you can go. Otherwise, like the moment passes. And I think that's true. Like if you jot something down, and then try to revisit it later, it just doesn't feel the same, because you've like missed this strange, intangible moment that is like the epiphany. So there's this mystery to it, I think. And I think we can create space for those epiphanies to take place. Like a lot of people will say when they're like washing dishes or they're in the shower, then doing idle tasks, like you've created this quiet in your mind where like something can rush in, like you create space for something to like take over you in that way. But if you're like scrolling on your phone for an hour before bed, and the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning is check your emails, there's no space for that to happen. So I think like the way I see it is this like mysterious thing, but there's a lot of answers that we have about how to allow those mysteries to happen to us more often, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And it takes discipline to create space for those things to happen. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And maybe if we create space more often, we would understand the mystery a little bit better. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, and just in like my experience, similar, where it's usually when I have a single task that I'm focused on that is not like requiring, it's more of like cleaning or something like that, not requiring brain work really. But that's when I could start to like get ideas, or when I'm on a walk or something almost like a meditative activity rather than busy work. I notice that in times when I have a lot of busy work is when I'm not super inspired or get a lot of ideas, because it's just so full of like all of this stuff that I need to get done. But when I'm create the space, like you were saying, that's when I do find them. And I often find myself going like, oh, I just need to like create some space to have those moments, because there's like specific moments in time where I've had inspiration or been inspired, and during those times is when like I was allowing more space for just downtime and not like scrolling or watching TV or I don't know, doing things that just filled the day rather than like created space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's like an element of like where like as creatives we need to like chase boredom. But then I think sometimes as creatives we're like very easily bored, and like a lot of us have like all these hobbies because we like don't want to feel bored. But I think it is essential.
Yeah, I think there's, I mean, I think there's a measure of kind of creating space, but I think that really varies person to person, because I think I used to often equate the idea of like creating space in my life for creative expression. I used to equivocate that with time. Like, okay, well then I need time. I need more time. The reality is, like, I own 3 businesses. I have children. Like, there's no time. Time is not a thing. That's not happening. And it's not going to happen anytime soon. So like, but I also don't really need a lot of time. Like, I'm just a fast processor. And so like I have very disciplined intake, masterclass, podcast, books. Like, I am rigorous about intake. And so for me, like, if I can just drive somewhere for 12 minutes, I can connect a lot of dots and just sit in kind of gray space. And like sometimes I literally just sit here and stare out the window for like 5 minutes. And it just gives me enough time to like, it's like I'm buffering. Like, I just like process everything that I input until it kind of settles in. And then I can call it up when I need to. Because it's almost like I very much, and I don't know if it's like when I was pregnant with Gus, I learned self-hypnosis so that I could give birth unmedicated. That's a different story. It doesn't work for that.
That's crazy.
But however, it did work in the sense that it taught me, they're like, you'll not feel pain. I mean, so don't believe anybody who ever tells you that. But it did teach me how to like go into my own mind and kind of create like an oriented experience where I have like anchors in my brain. Like, so I create there's a room, I can decorate it. I can put concepts in certain parts of the room. I can color them. I can give them icons. I can like create a space in my brain that's dedicated to thinking certain kinds of thoughts. And I can like do work there and then leave, and I deposit stuff. And then when I go back in, it's like memory triggers, and I can kind of pick up where I left off and like think through something a little bit more, build it a little bit more, change the room around, add a couple new things. Like it gave me this kind of skill to be able to do that. So I can sit here for like 5 minutes, go into a certain area of my brain that's thinking about something specific, and like do a little bit of work there. And I've found that like what that really does is it sets me up how, like, I think of inspiration as like turning on a light. Like, I didn't see something before, and suddenly I'll have put together enough pieces and I can like flip a light on and I'm like, that's new. Like, I didn't see that before, and now I see it. And it like changes you, right? When you go from like, you can't see something clearly to I see and understand that. Like, to me, that's the most rewarding part of being inspired, because it literally illuminates your life and gives you, and then you can see like people who don't see it. Like you start to have like kind of cognitive dissonance with some people, because you're like, but how can you not see this now? Because this is so clear and bright. But for them, that light's just not on yet. Like, I feel like there's a metaphor of lights off that's inappropriate and about somebody's intelligence, but that's not what I mean to draw here. Isn't there like, or no, it's like, I'm going to punch your lights out. Okay. See, so there's metaphors in our culture for thinking of your brain that way. Light bulb, etc. We use light metaphors a lot with thinking. So maybe I just inherited that idea.
When you have an idea and then you see that other people don't understand it, that's part of the inspiration for creating something from the idea, to like help people understand it more.
Right.
So, because if you have an idea and you're like, oh, everyone already knows this, then you're like, whatever, moving on.
But yeah, so for me, creating that space and creating that opportunity for new ideas is very intellectual. But based on my Enneagram, I do live from my head. So that's just what it is, right? Taylor lives from her heart. We know this. But yeah, I mean, that's how I go about it.
I have I've learned a very like profound inspiration for a more intellectual or like more like rigorous approach to creativity, because I think it takes like work ethic and structure to create that space. Like I see creativity as much more organic, like a separate thing from me that I need to, as a person, structure spaces to like for that to happen. And like I have a process for it, and if I don't follow the process, then I notice, I'll be like, oh, I haven't been reading this month, and then I haven't written a poem all month. Well, and the second I start reading again, then suddenly it's like this door opens and like all these things are like crawling out, like, we've been waiting. So it's like, yeah, I feel like I have a huge respect for the work ethic, and like like intellectualizing it, I think, is important. It's something that I've learned over time.
Mm-hmm. Chris has a very different version of creativity than I do.
Yeah.
Maybe the opposite.
I'm trying to think of the best way to kind of put it into words. I think you talk about where does epiphany, where does revelation come from? And I think a lot of it comes from a point of perspective, because you can have two people in the same environment, in the same situation, facing the same problems, and one of them can come up with a solution because they've got a different perspective on something that somebody else might not have. They're bringing in all that stuff we talked about before of knowledge acquisition and tools and skills and all that kind of stuff, so they can step in and be ready to kind of handle whatever it is that's coming. But I think, like, for me, when I talk about like kind of a point of perspective, creativity usually comes in like a sense of, I feel, experiencing something. And so if Joy and I are working on kind of a story, a novel, kind of thing. And like she said, she'll sit down and just boom, 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 boom. She just knocks it out and she's got it all there. And it's like, I got to sit with this for a while, and I got to take my head and I got to put myself in this situation, and I got to kind of look around and feel what's going on and see what this looks like. And like, I just have to kind of experience whatever it is that's going on, and then be able to kind of create out of that. And unlike Joy that can just shut it off when it's interrupted for me, like when that creative process is something breaks that concentration or that moment, then it's really hard for me to get back to it. And it's really hard, like you were saying, Taylor, of the train going by, of like just that it was there and now it's gone. And I just kind of have to sit there and wait a minute for, it's like, okay, where'd it go? How do I get back to that spot? How do I get back to, because I had an idea and I was working on something and now it's gone. So that's hard for me. That's hard to like kind of turn it into an actual process of, this is it. This is the time that you do it, because I have a really hard time working that way.
Because you're like a when inspiration strikes kind of person.
Yeah, like when I was in college and we would be doing like short films and different kind of video projects and stuff, like I'd be falling asleep at night and then I'd get an idea and it was like, I'm up until 3 or 4 in the morning because I've just got to do this, and I've got to do this now while it's in my brain. And then once it's gone, then it's gone. And I think it's another thing that I struggle with is I have an idea and I'll sit on it for days, weeks, months, years, and it just plays around in my head. But I feel like the second I write it down, then it's like it's out, it's gone, and I can't work on it anymore. And so I'm very careful when it comes to, okay, I'm going to actually write it down now because I feel this is the best possible, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Can I ask you? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I can like 100% relate to that, Chris. Like that is definitely how I process and work on things as well. Like I have to find that like experience or setting, and like it has to be, I don't know, I have to like get myself in all prepared. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you guys if like, because when you were talking, Chris, about like how things just come and then you have to like get up and do it, like those specific moments of creativity, because I feel like I have experienced both, because I'll try to like push myself to have a routine, but in those moments, sometimes when I feel like this burst of creativity and almost like something else is coming over me to like use me as like a vessel to write something or whatever, I'll like look back at what I've written later and like surprise myself. Like I'm like, what? What did I do there? Like, and it's so mysterious to me and wonderful. I'm just wondering if you guys ever experienced anything like that.
I think there's definitely, for me, a difference between those inspired moments and the forced moments, where it's like I've got to just kind of there's a gap here in a story that I'm working on, or a picture. So I'm just going to put something in there because I've got to, versus, all right, yeah, I'm really feeling this. I'm really, and it just kind of flows together and stuff. Like I can tell the difference between those two states, or whatever you want to call it. And so, yeah, I think there is a significant change in that.
Yeah, I feel like if I have written something down and like an idea, or I'm working on a project, I have to spend 30 minutes or so like getting back into it to get back into that state. So like rereading and just like how did I feel when I was working on this? It's like, it's weird, but it's like I have to like find a feeling, almost like that inspired feeling, in order to like continue at the same level of creativity or inspiration that I like started with. And it's a lot of times for me, it's like I can usually find it in the mornings, but anytime after that, it feels very forced. It's like more of my inspiration comes in the morning. Yeah.
Interesting. I wonder if it's because like you're not as bogged down by external factors. Yeah. Cool. Have you ever read this question for everybody? Have you ever read The Artist's Way by, I think it's Julie Cameron? No. She talks about how every morning you should start your day, if you're a creative person, with like
morning pages.
Yeah, like handwritten morning pages. And I always try to do this because I think it's probably a game changer. Everyone says that it is, but like forcing yourself to get up every morning and just like dump your ideas onto the page.
Yeah, I did that for most of my life. I really only stopped once I kind of had kids, and it just became impossible from a routine perspective. But yeah, I mean, when we got married and I moved, I had like 150 journals that I had filled out over the course of my life that we recycled, because I was like, this is worth keeping. But it's just
it's worth keeping.
Just the discipline of kind of putting your thoughts down and teaching yourself how to communicate even to yourself.
Did you find it like helped with your creative pursuits? I mean, I guess it must have if you did it for so long.
Yeah. I think so. I mean, and I think too, it just, so to me, it's so much more about learning how to think. Like, I don't relate to the feeling thing. Like, I can be in any mood. But I also tend to be fairly disassociated from my feelings. Like, I'm just not very emotional or feelings driven. So like, for me, that's not, it's almost, and I've grappled with this kind of in trying to become a more empathetic, warm human, of like, the reality is like, I don't have to pretend like I have feelings that I don't have just to fit in. It's like, everyone's like elated or devastated or sad or this and that. I'm like, I don't feel anything. I don't feel, it's like, my range is like this. Like, I'm either like angry or tired. Like, okay, like I'm allowed. But I also don't think, if I were to say like just objectively, that I'm an artistic or creative person at all. Like, I'm just not. Like, I'm a very good arranger and rearranger. Like, I can take a lot of information in and it looks like creativity on the way out because of the volume and because nobody else has, in a casual reading of something, has enough familiarity with my myriad of references to be able to identify it as mild plagiarism, ripping off other people's ideas. And I'm not doing it on purpose. I'm just aggregating.
Yeah, that goes back to like what we were talking about earlier, how like creativity is like this combination of all the things that influence us. And yeah, I don't think that necessarily means it's not creativity. It's, you're still creating something using the pieces that you have. I don't know.
Ex nihilo, right? I'm not creating something out of nothing. I'm just creating something with some things that are not even that different from the original.
I guess I just don't think we can create things out of nothing. Or at least I don't think we have any evidence, and it's not possible for us to get any evidence that we could, because we are all influenced by everything. So how could we know if we could create things out of nothing? Because all of us are influenced by everything that's ever happened to us. So
It's like every intro to philosophy course starts with like, what's a circle?
Right.
How do you know? I don't believe in math, but I have to stop saying that without context. Yeah. So we talked a little bit about processes and practices, and it sounds like it's, super different from all of us. I guess I'm interested to kind of circle back to something all three of you spoke about, which was essentially kind of the lightning strike element, to use another light-based metaphor. So it seems like there is a sense in which perhaps you can, cultivate creativity through your practices and build the repository of things to make connections to, kind of form new ideas and inspiration. But then you've also all three described kind of this lightning strike where it's like sometimes it almost takes me over and it feels just almost divine or otherworldly or state of inspiration. Have you ever found that you're able, I mean, Ashley, you kind of alluded to it, like putting yourself in the feeling or the context or revisiting the moment, like, can you make that happen?
I can only to like build off of something that already came. Do you know what I mean? Like, not the initial epiphany or, idea, but to build off to get back to that. I can, because I've already worked out, like mapped it out in some way, whether it's in my head or on paper. And so I can like revisit that and then work to get back there, but not the initial. The initial idea just comes when it wants to.
We're anthropomorphizing ideas a lot in this conversation, which I think is interesting. As though they have a life of their own.
Yes.
Maybe they do. Okay.
Yeah. For me, I think a lot of the stuff we've already talked about, like if I was just to like structure out the way that I like, or the choices that I make to create space for those moments to happen, would be consuming things really consciously, consuming meaningful things that challenge me. And specifically if I'm working on a project, I'll consume things that I know are like my peers in the project. So what have other people done in this realm? So like being really conscious about my consumption, like pushing myself to read instead of scroll, stuff like that. And then creating that balance that I was talking about earlier between life experience and reflection. Like I think you have to create moments where you can like go out into the world, converse with people, and then also have moments of solitude where you can reflect on the things that you've experienced and what they mean to you. And then like Chris was saying earlier, create a lot of space for learning technique and honing craft, so that all those things that you're learning about humanity, you're able to put into the most precise, articulate, effective form. And then just having the courage and bravery to believe in yourself that your idea is worth creating. I think courage is something that's necessary for people, because if you're not even like giving yourself the permission to like have ideas and to bring them to life, then I don't think that you're going to be open to like receiving ideas. You'll probably spend a lot of time consuming, but not like making the space and putting the effort in to like create the space to actually make something, if that makes sense. So I think a combination of all those things is how you can create space for those things to happen to you. But I don't think there's like, or at least for me, I wish there was a light switch that I could just turn on. But I think that it's like multiple light switches. Like I got to turn on lots. And if I turn them all on, then I can see things. And if I turn one on, it's kind of dim. I'm like, I kind of see that in there. But the more of them I turn on, the more of a chance I can like have that sort of clarity.
What do you think, Kenny?
I think for me, it's not like I'm not able to kind of force it to happen, but there are elements that I can use to help when it does. So like for me, like music is a big thing. And so if I can put on specific types of music, certain kinds of genres or whatever else, like, and I say, okay, this is the time that I'm hoping that something happens, then I find that when it does, that music is helping me kind of direct in which way I want to go. And so, like, you know, Tuesday nights, I take the kids to gymnastics and I sit there for an hour on these really hard bleachers while they do their thing and roll around and scream and stuff. And so, I go there thinking, okay, I've got an hour now. I can sit here and I can draw and I can do whatever else. And I've got music and I'll put it in my ears. And some weeks I'll sit there and it just starts happening. And I look up and they're done already. And I'm like, oh man, I was in the flow. And then other times I'm going there, I'm like, all right, this is going to happen. And then I can't. Like, there's my brain just won't click. It won't do these things. There's kids running around and running into me or whatever. Like, I'm getting distracted a lot. And so I just end up sitting there and not accomplishing anything. So I don't know that I can actually like make creativity happen. This is the formula for it. But there are little things that I find help me when it does happen.
I think a lot of times artists get a little bit hung up on like the actual creating as like the only time you're making art. But I see it like even just you listening to music that you're like, okay, this is going to help me. Or you just like sitting there and like thinking about creating art or just consuming things that are going to potentially inspire you, I think is all a process of creating, because whatever you're consuming is going to become like, is going to come out on the page of whatever you're creating later. So it's like resisting that like urge to shame yourself of like, oh, I'm not creating something. But if you're an artist and you're walking around in the world and you're just like thinking consciously about art, like you're creating. It's just one part of the process, I guess.
Yeah. And I think, thankfully I don't ever feel kind of ashamed of, oh, nope, I didn't do that. It was just more kind of all right, that one didn't work. That didn't happen this time. And so I'm able to just kind of circle back around to it later. But yeah, I think also just kind of being attentive to the things around you helps me kind of get into that state as well, because like listening to music or just kind of paying attention to what's going on around me, there'll be just a little melody or a little something that hits my ear and it's like, oh, I got a picture in my head. And then I start running off, in this way, or I see, a funny shaped tree or something like that if I'm just kind of paying attention to what's around while also not paying attention to what's around, then it can kind of branch off wherever.
We keep referencing the gray space in brains, and we're not actually saying the gray space in brains, but that's what you guys are talking about, by the way. There is a neurological phenomenon happening. Your neurons are more active in certain regions. Interesting. So this is, I think, maybe my question that is biased and based on my own perspective. So feel free to tell me it's garbage. But is like, what is the inherent value of fresh ideas and inspiration? Why do we care if we're pursuing these things? We care because we make money being creative. But aside from that.
Does someone else want to speak first?
I mean, I always look at it as, and maybe it's like, I look at like efficiency. We're just making like being creative to make, that's how my creativity, I look at creativity, like doing things to make them more efficient. And new ideas and innovations are to better, what the hope would be to better society as a whole. I think that, that can be up for debate on many things, but that's kind of what I think of the purpose when I look at it. Like,
well, that's such an interesting articulation based on when we did our like personal mission statements last year or this year, whenever we did our personal mission statements. I remember yours being essentially about being useful to people. And that's such an important part of your personal goal and definition of value and all that.
Right. Yeah. So I guess that makes sense. Why?
Yeah, that's a nice pairing.
Yeah. And I think it's like important, like you said, to understand the purpose of your creativity in order to assign value to it. Because why you're creating will directly influence whether or not a new idea is valuable, or like what its value is. Like, I think for me, it's kind of similar to you. Like, I create because I want to make things that advance our collective narrative in a way that I think is as authentic to my experience as possible. Like, I want to create things that reflect what it's like to be in this time, and I put things out there and let other people determine if it resonates with them, and if it does, great. If it doesn't, okay. So in that sense, like, I think the value of like a fresh idea, I've already, I think, said that I just don't really think that those exist. But rather like a more evolved idea, the value would be that if I manage to create something one day, or if anyone manages to create something that is a next evolution of an idea, that they can be the shoulders that the next person stands on. And that's, I think, incredibly valuable. If anyone deems your shoulders worthy of standing on, that's a massive compliment, or just like a job well done, I suppose. Yeah, so I think the only way to get there is, to challenge yourself to learn from others as much as possible, and then create something that others can learn from. Mm-hmm. Yeah, which I think is valuable inherently.
I think creativity is what makes us human. I mean, if you think about people in, Chris and I've traveled all over the world, like people in totally undeveloped cultures still have art. Women weaving baskets still dye the reeds different colors. Like, there are paintings on the walls of caves. Everything that we do in life is ultimately an attempt to reinforce identity, to figure out what imprint we'll leave. And creativity is what separates us from animals, right? It's what separates us from things that can't express themselves in any kind of meaningful or individualistic way. The impulse to create is probably the strongest thing that we have. And it supersedes tragedy, and it supersedes personality, and it supersedes culture. And if we were to really define it, even sociologically, we would say that's what makes you human.
Yeah, I would say, like, I agree to an extent. I feel like what makes us human is our desire to sense make, and creativity is a natural outflow of that. Yeah. Like, creativity is some people's way of making sense, but like recognizing patterns and then creating patterns, I think is, because sorry. That's my thought. Mm-hmm. And I'll let someone else speak.
Yeah, I think, speaking to that, like the overall reason we do it, the value that it brings, and you can get really deep into this, but like, I think it's the reason we're made. Like, it's the reason that we are, because you think, what's the opposite of to create something? It's to destroy something, or it's to consume something. And so if we were just destroyers, just consumers, everything would disappear, everything would fall apart, everybody would, and so whether it's as writers, as an artist, as a chef, as a woodworker, as a mechanic, as all of these different things that we do, we say we enjoy them, we say we like to do them, we're good at them, but like there is that innate being, whatever, within us to create, like this innate desire to create and to do something else. And if that's not there, then yeah, we just kind of turn into a vacuum, like a plague of locusts coming through. You take everything that you want and then you try to move on to the next thing. So for me, like, why do I create? Why do I draw? Why do I do these things like that? Like, I just do. Like, it's just there and it's just coming out. And so that just makes me think like it's part of who and what I am.
I find it so interesting that you say like creating and consuming are opposites, because it's definitely, there's truth to that. But we've also talked so much in this conversation about how they're reliant on each other. So I'm just thinking about that. I don't have anything like necessarily articulate to say about it, but I found that really interesting. And I will be chewing on it for a while.
In one sense, that kind of gives, in a way, it gives that creativity also a purpose. Because if it's like, I made this amazing painting, I'm going to stick it in the closet and it's gone. Nobody will ever know that it happened. Nobody that knows that it's there or whatever. Like, you've experienced that, but I feel like if there's not any more purpose, maybe that is all the purpose that you need, to just do it because you just kind of want to do it. But in a creative professional environment, there needs to be somebody on the other side to consume, to take that, to use it. And so, yeah, that consuming also gives purpose to the creating. But if there's not a continuation of the creating and just consuming, then yeah, it'll disappear.
Yeah, interesting. And then in its consumption is one way to derive value from it. But not necessarily, you're saying, the only way, and not the primary way either. So you're saying it's a part of who you are. Yeah, very interesting. I like that.
So the last thing I kind of wanted to hit on was the idea of endurance. We've likened inspiration and fresh ideas to like turning lights on or things like that. And we've obviously just had a discussion about it as a state of being or identity. Do new ideas endure, or is there value in their definition, which is that they are new and then they become embedded into who you are or contribute to something, and then you move on to the next, to the next, to the next? Do they build? Do they pass? Are they a commodity that you just kind of take for a minute and then shed? Like, how do you see that?
I think the base of a new idea is what endures. And so it's like, Steve Jobs talking about, being able to put a phone in your pocket that has all the music and whatever else. And like, the base idea of that is you want to be able to communicate with others easily. You want to be able to listen to music whenever you want, those type of things. And that might be a bad example, but like the idea of, fingerprint sensors or face recognition, all these kind of things, like, I feel like those ideas pass away because they're more just kind of features of things. But that base idea, that base desire, that base solution or whatever, that's what endures. And that's what kind of evolves over time, where Asimov's writing about stuff, 60 years ago, and it's coming to happen today. What he was writing about was just kind of that base human communication skills or whatever. And so I think, yeah, like, there is a root idea in most any new original evolutions of ideas that stays consistent moving forward.
Would you say like those root ideas are like collective goals for us to
I think they can be. Yeah, like, as Ashley talks about, doing something that's kind of for the better of society, the better of humanity, or however big you want to take it. And like, yeah, it's a collective pursuit. It's something that resonates with everybody and kind of fulfills either a need or desire, or fixes a problem or something that we just kind of continue to face throughout our existence.
Yeah, that really resonates with me. I feel like if the collective goal of creation is to connect with each other, or to understand each other, to understand ourselves, then every fresh idea, even if it doesn't last, which I don't think that it does, and I think that if it does, that means we're not progressing enough, that every fresh idea is valuable because it's just the next step towards that goal. And even if an idea is like fresh but bad, then it's like a direction we understand we don't want to go. Then we're like, yeah.
Still serves the revelatory purpose. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Ashley?
Hold on. Sorry, I froze. I couldn't unmute. No, I just am listening and thinking like, whoa, I need like hours to think about this before coming up with a really good response.
Which fits your personality profile, so we will let you defer if you'd like.
Yeah,
this is not a light conversation. Sorry.
No. I think part of myself was just internally fighting with like, I feel like things are so destructive right now. And it's like, oh, purpose of creativity and inspiration. I don't know. I think I need to think about that, which I agree with, but it feels like very glim right now, just as a whole.
But I love that you said that, because like what Chris was saying earlier about how creativity is like the opposite of destroying things, and almost like the value is like extremely necessary right now for us to create things that serve as like an antidote to the horrible times in which we live.
That's a very positive way to think about it. I will use that and think about it in that way.
That's why I started the Stuff We Think is Beautiful channel.
Yeah.
Slack. So I was like, we need beauty. We need to linger on beauty and look for it. Because we know, based on just cognitive biases, you will see what you look for.
Yeah.
All right.
True.
Well, thanks for this, guys. What fun.